Good morning. I'm now trying to make a commentary on lecture 28 of the Foundations of Esotericism. It's been a little while since the last one. As I say, each of these last lectures is more dense and more complex than the previous one. So it's taken me quite some time to work out what to say about this. So not quite sure where we'll end up, but we shall see. So at the beginning of this lecture, Rudolf Steiner is really trying to bring a number of things into a synthesis again. The idea of evolution, where things have come out of the spiritual world to form us and have been taken into the human being, and in so doing certain things have appeared in natural form. And now there is a reversal, as he says, that now we receive, for example, the light from the world. Formerly we were a source of light, and now the light streams into us. We have become self-enclosed and thereby acquired consciousness. The consequence of that, of course, is that as certain things are initially exuded from the human being, as we saw, I think, in the last lecture, that in Atlantis water appeared, and so then there was an overuse of water, and then Atlantis was destroyed by the use of water, and in Lemuria it was fire. In our time there is a further step of evolution where we will need to have engagement with evil, where we need to take a certain amount of evil into ourselves to raise in consciousness to our spiritual self, but at the same time evil will emerge in the world as a dynamic through which we will also have to have a certain destructive force upon us. He also then tries to bring this into an area that I find quite fascinating, especially for the works that I'm writing on at the moment, is that these dynamics are reflected well in the some of the Old Testament, especially the book of Genesis. The creation story in the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible reflect this process very well. And the commentary on that, of course, is in how do we, use symbolic symbols, mythical or symbolic texts to come to higher knowledge, where we can use the text as a kind of bridge between human consciousness and cosmic consciousness, that these are not just to be taken literally, that the actual way that the texts and the symbols that humanity has created, or the initiates have created in the past, need to be used correctly as a form of application of our thinking, feeling and willing to their content, so that some of this is the foundations of esotericism, is that we need to use the symbolic culture that humanity has provided us, and in each culture is different, but that we have these cultural collectives that they actually provide for us a methodology where we apply our concentration and our thought upon the symbols, and then we can come to the higher knowledge as well. So that is a whole methodology that needs to emerge now in the scientific world, where we go from the empirical kind of method of the physical senses, maybe to the quantitative kind of research where we are starting to use the soul senses and reflect upon personal experience and developing that, but eventually we'll also need to develop a third realm of perception in the spiritual senses, and how meditation upon the symbols and the mystical texts of culture allow us to move further and further into these, where he actually says that the mystic is the investigator of the inner. We attempt to seek out those stages of evolution through which we have been created, and these symbols help us do that. But in this particular text we also talk about how the heart appeared, how the brain appeared, how then the solar plexus also appears, but then there's also certain things that became physically apparent in the world, the various elements and etheric beings that came about. And as he gets now deeper into these lectures, he becomes more and more focused on our particular period of evolution. He calls it a root race. Of course, we need to change that language. Stein himself also said that this kind of language was a very naive language in the first part of his development in the early 1900s, when he was still using theosophical and Eastern language, Eastern esoteric language. He used the word root race for a slightly larger period of time, but then also sub-races. We would now call these sub-races our cultural epochs, as we've said, in each of these rounds and globes that we have. There are 7 of them of about 2,100 years. So a particular developmental phase has 7 cultural epochs within it. So I'm going to call them a developmental phase. And he focuses very much in our developmental phase, which is the middle, the one after the middle of Atlantis, where we have, we could say, the development of consciousness that takes place in the Mesopotamian cradle from India through Persia, Babylon, Egypt, Greco-Roman, Central Europe, Slavonic, and then ultimately setting the seeds for a future one in the 7th phase. And this is something that he starts to talk about in this lecture, which we'll come to in more detail next time, is that we need to see the evolution, involution phases of development, that in each of these times, each of these developmental phases with the 7 cultural epochs, there's a certain task within them. Ours is to develop the manas, or as was now called the consciousness soul. In this 5th phase, we are at the sort of the peak point of that. The seeds for this were in the 4th cultural developmental phase of this particular part of our earth, in Atlantis. And then we see that the 4th, so to say, the 4th period of Atlantis was where that task met its fulfillment. And this becomes a bit of a mathematical mind-joggling kind of imagination that you need to follow. In the 5th phase of the last one, which was the 4th, the seeds of our phase were already started to be laid, and he calls those the pre-Semitic. So the central part of our development is laid in the center of our time, which is the Greek Roman Semitic interface 2,000 years ago, where we see through the Hebrew people, the Semitic people, not just the Hebrew people, but the Semitic people, the Greeks and the Romans, a certain fulfillment comes about of what was laid in seed in the Atlantean period, of the 5th Atlantean period. So we are now in the 5th cultural epoch, but in the 5th cultural epoch of the 4th developmental phase, the seeds were laid. So, and then 6 and 7 of that 4th phase were slightly sort of a phase of dissolution, and now we will in our 5th phase reach the peak of our development in the 5th cultural epoch, which we are in. So from 1500s, 1400s, the 15th century, the beginning of our sort of industrial revolution, Copernicus, the whole so to say perfection of the physical realm through science, is the peak of our intellectual development and the beginning of the phase of the development of the consciousness soul. And this will culminate, it will start going into an involutionary period now, it will fold in, and then in the 6th period, so after another couple of thousand years, the seeds for the 6th developmental phase will be laid. And the 7th cultural epoch here in America, we will see that there is, so to say, the seeds have been put through to that. So we will reach a certain pinnacle of our time now in this Central European time. But he also starts giving us some really interesting pictures at the end of this lecture, which gives us cause for some debate, which is that in this time, in our 6th epoch, so we're in the 5th cultural epoch, in the 6th cultural epoch, so if we do the maths on this, we started in 1500, 2160 years, so there's still about another 1600 years from now, so around the year 3000, or just before that, the social forces will start to be developed, and he says the 6th cultural epoch has the task of permeating society in a social way with everything that has been produced by the preceding stages of evolution. For the first time, Christianity will come forth as a shaper of the social order. Now that's quite a confronting statement, because of course we could see how Christianity, or certainly churchianity, if one wants to put it in this sense, Steiner's talking about Christianity as a cultural impulse, not as an institutional impulse. So at this point, since the 4th century to now, Christianity has been subserved into institutionalization and has taken up the Greco-Roman impulse, and we can say that in our time work has become a commodity. We sell our work. We are very bound up in our work being valued by money. In the time before that, as we know, he says that work was performed as a tribute, slave labor. So we are moving out of the fourth Greco-Roman British Empire kind of gesture towards labour, where it was done by slave labour, to now have our work valued as a commodity. But ultimately, when Christianity becomes the social order, work will be formed as an offering. So we will have free work. So this is where we can see at some levels in our social commentary at the moment, base salaries, living salaries. Money needs to become a right, not earned by work. But we will also see that involuntary work, people wanting to actually want to work, but their needs will need to be met. So the social threefold order that Steiner developed later on has very much implicit in it that our needs are to be met by money, which ultimately will mean that money needs to be detached from productivity and consumerism and become a human right, so that we can work where we are called to as a vocation, where we will be able to offer our work into a situation because our basic physical needs are met by the money that is given to us as a human right. These are all part of the Christian formation, the true Christianity or the mystical Christianity, which becomes part of the social order forming forces. So that's quite interesting. In the next, at the moment in our root race or our sort of cultural epoch, we have a predisposition to egotism, and in the next one we will find a balance between selfishness and selflessness, and then in the seventh subrace a kind of hypertrophy will come about, and the human being will then pour out what is now within us, our egotism. And then I think it's here where he says that, this is quite interesting, that human egoism or world egoism will actually take over this moment where we are trying to develop social form that is done out of selflessness. It'll come to a certain fruition, but then the egotism of our age will once again predominate. And he says it is from the West, from the Anglo-American races, England and America, all the discoveries that come from the earth like a network of egoism. So it's from there that the whole earth will be covered by a network of egotistic evil. Well, one could almost say, well, we can already see the hallmarks of that happening. A small colony in the east, in the Slavonic peoples, where there will be a seed for the new future, where the selflessness of the next epoch will also then, the selflessness and the work as gift will start to be able to develop out of the seeds that are laid in the next while. So we can see, at this point in 2020, we probably are wondering where the world is at. And in this particular lecture, we can see the seeds of these battles between egotism, the egotistical machination coming out of the Anglo-American nations, the whole world being taken over by the paradigms of work as commodity, where we're paid for our work, so-called capitalism, oligarchy, I would call it, are definitely coming to some form of fruition. But we also can pay attention then to where some of these other things, the Christian social forms, not the churchianity social forms, but the mystical Christianity social forms, we can also start to put into place. And he gives it a bit of a direction here with these things. The direction is at the moment we are maybe trying to find a balance between egotism and selflessness, where work can become an offering. So he already says, there always needs to be people in a certain time where these seeds are planted by single efforts. So another way of looking at this would be to say that the world has come about by the spirits of form. We've been formed from the outside. We've taken these things within us, and we've expelled or coalesced out of us the physical world around us. And because we are trying to mature certain things, certain dynamics within our soul, what has been brought out external of us will also then eventually be the forces of destruction. So again, Atlantis was destroyed by water, Lemuria was destroyed by fire. Our planet, our sort of cultural development period will be developed by egotism and evil. So at this point, we're trying to develop selflessness within us, but we have to squeeze out the egotism, and the egotism will express itself in the world, which will then also become the forces of our own destruction. But in his words and in his ideas is that this is, the plant-like development of evolution of consciousness, is that there's a certain fruition that comes about in any seven cultural epochs, known as a cultural development point. We are in the one that's known as the sort of post-Atlantic developmental period with the seven cultural epochs. Ours is to develop a sort of a warmed intellectualism that starts to see the imaginations of spirit. That'll bear a certain fruit, but then as any plant, that has to die away and go back into a seed form. So this is not good news, because we all want the world to be peaceful and beautiful and perfect and a place of rest, but actually it's not really that. It is quite a hard journey to remain human, but also to know exactly what we're working for. So inwardly we are trying to find a balance between our egotism and our selflessness, and make sure that the seeds of selflessness as a cultural epoch move. And I find that quite useful to know that, our work as human beings, not so long ago we had the paradigm of slavery, where work was paid as tribute to something. Now we are working as commodity, where we see our work is performed for money. But we now need to also start working towards work being an offering which is then free work, because our needs, the governments and the money systems, and that will eventually start to see, maybe not next week or the next few decades, but at some point we will start to see that the money and the money systems, or the economic systems, need to support human needs at a base level, and if not more equity. So the extremes of communism and capitalism will need to find a middle point. I don't think we have words for this yet. Rudolf Steiner called it the free economic life, or the threefold social order. That'll also need to find a new name. But where money becomes a human right, and our needs for education, the basic needs in Maslow's pyramid of needs, all the basic needs will need to be met by the community, and then we can work on what we are called to creatively. We can offer our work into the various realms. People would argue against us that then certain things won't happen. I don't believe that, because our karma and our genius will drive us to all have different things that we need to do in the world. So karma will also become part of the Christian impulse to social ordering in the future. But right now, we're probably developing the seeds for that, for once a certain amount of destruction has come about, socially, through the egotism of the mechanization that's coming out of the Anglo-Saxon world, will be able to come to fruition in a not too far distant future, as the next cultural flowering in what's called the sixth cultural epoch of our post-Atlantean cultural development phase. So yeah, very big thoughts. He puts it into a very few pages, and that's why it's so hard to comment on it and unpack it. Unfortunately, these videos are also quite short. Each of these would be a lecture cycle in themselves, and of course Rudolf Steiner comes back to these ideas through books and lectures later on and unfolds it to further ideas. But here are some of my thoughts in this early phase, and I understand more why this is called the foundations of esotericism, because you've got to get your head around these things before you can unfold the further implications of it. So I hope that's been helpful. Only 3 more to go after this. We're getting towards the end of this. Wonder what we'll do next. Okay, have a good day.